Okay, welcome everyone to this talk that we've called the Fear and Trauma Wolfpack. This is, as some of you have heard me speak on the subject before, this is an extremely vulnerable, extremely powerful and personal subject for me. And I want to just acknowledge that there is a possibility that this conversation might make you anxious, that this conversation might make you feel uncomfortable. And the reason for that is I know some of your stories, and there are some very big traumas, which I call powers, in this room. And I just want to acknowledge you that you will go into periods of discomfort, perhaps at certain times. The other thing I would really like to encourage you is whenever we're taking on information from another individual, to not get caught up on the things you don't agree with. It is such a wonderful thing. You know, I pick a single teacher once a month, and every single night of my life, I listen to an audio lecture from that person. And I've been doing this for a long time. I cannot agree with everything that that person says. And if I check myself out of the process simply because that part doesn't work for me, then I disempower myself from all the other information that's available. So I want you to just go through your own process, and what works for you, take upon, and what doesn't. So I'm going to start very personally. Some of you know my story and some of you don't, and I'm not going to get very deeply into it. It's a conversation in its own. But essentially, my earliest memories are of being absolutely terrified. Those are my earliest memories. I have a memory of standing in a pre-primary school. I think I was about 2 or 3 years old, with snot running down my cheeks, staring at the other children. Now, I am positive this is how the memory goes, but I remember thinking I'm in deep shit. That is one of my earliest memories, that I was sitting watching kids going, whoa, I'm in trouble. I constantly felt absolutely ill in my solar plexus. Of course, as a child, and many of you will know this, we had no way of measuring what it is that we were experiencing. And not all problems come from childhood. We're just using this as an entry point. Going through my life, I was very often in and out of psychosis. And for the means of this conversation, I'm not going to get into the possibility of what it could have been spiritually with spiritual sight. What I can tell you is my experience of it was horrific. The thought that came to my mind earlier was that I remember crying and screaming out one night, and this was a regular occurrence. And my mom would bring me into her bedroom to sleep right against her bed. And I was literally half a meter away from her, and I would still lie there shaking, freaking out. On that particular night, I remember that there was a man, and I don't know how to explain this to you guys. He was standing next to the bed with a guitar going, screaming and shouting at me, trying to scare him. Now, of course, to no one else, the man wasn't there. So my life was filled with these episodes of psychosis where I was trying to explain to everyone what was going on with me. And the most bizarre experiences where sometimes I couldn't remember if I'd dreamt it or not. And you can imagine the type of emotional, like separation anxiety. It is a known fact and joke in my family, if we get together for a bride, that I literally just screamed for the first 14 years of my life. I just cried. That's all I did. So the reason I share you with this very dramatic entry is just because I want you to understand that this is not something I'm going to discuss with you theoretically. This has been my greatest tormentor, and it has also been my greatest liberator. And I want to pose to you this evening that if you are having some sort of trauma rise, or if you are having some sort of a fear spiral going on in your life, that you are being called, the hero's call. And we're going to discuss what that could be. And in the classical hero's journey coined by Joseph Campbell in the 20s, it's the story about how no matter where you live in the world and no matter what your belief system is, we all hold a single archetype, and that is when the crisis comes and your soul calls you to meet it. And what we usually do is we turn away once, twice, perhaps 1,000 times from facing what it is we need to face. And in the story that I built for you last time, but that I'll mention again, the way I have experienced it as a child is a wolf named Jakob, and the wolf used to chase me at night. And the incredible thing is, all through my life, I developed many fears, and Jakob was always there shamanically to chase me. And the profound thing about the wolf pack that hunts you down is that the more you run, the more encouraged they become, the more they increase in numbers, and soon they are hot on your heels and you can lose your entire life to them. So right at this beginning of this journey, I'm suggesting that we are all in this room because we have already answered our hero's call, or because perhaps you are considering for the first time in your life taking on this mantle. Now, in a hero's journey, and this story is not unique just to spirituality, you see it as almost what you could call the substrate of all great stories, from Star Wars to the never-ending story. When you decide to heed the call, you've got to go down and descend into the darkness, the dark shadow of the night, or perhaps into the caves of your own mind or your own fears. And it is in there that you will meet the foe and you will discover the knowledge. And it is a fight for your own life, your own psyche, your own happiness. It is a war for the very well-being of your soul. And emerging from this, like in all great heroes' journeys, you come out with the mighty gifts that you have brought into this world, that you have planned to bring into this world. And I want us to just begin this journey with these very uncomfortable things that are going to be said about the possibility that no matter what you are experiencing, that you have an opportunity now to take this journey, to descend first conceptually with me and perhaps later on in your own life, and to decide what it is that you are finally trying to bring into this life. And we will end with the fact that the only way to truly find the purpose of your life, which is not based on age or anything, is to first face the greatest obstacle that you have been put or chosen to put in front of yourselves. And that's where we are. My story is not a pretty one, and it had very, very little courage from my perspective. As I mentioned to some people, I have drunk myself into comas. I have drugged myself in ways that you'd be shocked. I have downed bottles of mouthwash. I have wanted to cut things out of my stomach. I have hurt myself. I have burnt myself. I have been institutionalized. I have not left my room for 3 months once. I developed such complex neuroses that I was too scared to close my eyes. And I really went into the depths of hell. And it has taken my entire life to claw my way out. And what I used to perceive was the worst thing that's ever happened to me has become the best thing that's ever happened to me, because I have vowed to myself to find other people like me. And it doesn't mean that yours has to be similar to my story. Mine is a story of CPTSD. It's a story of epilepsy. It's a story of psychosis. It's a story of drug abuse. I have been the coward. I have been the betrayer. I have been the addict. I have also been the hero, the friend, the lover. I have held many faces, just like every face that I'm looking at right now. We are not one thing. We are many, many things. So this incredible thing is, when we opened this discussion last week or 2 weeks ago, we focused very much on the fear side, but we never really looked at where these things actually come from. And the most fascinating thing is the people that Heinrich and myself, who is in the room and we'll ask to say hello to us a little bit later, in the organization and in the coaching that we do, something that's come up 3 times in the last week is the first thing someone says to me in session is, Nathan, this is what I do, this is what I do, this is what I do. I really need to remember how this started. So I want to build a distinction for us immediately. The thing that happened to you, first of all, might have been so much worse than you think and not be the thing that you think it was. Some of us are sitting with emotional aberrations, fears, neuroses, and some of us are pretty sure that we knew exactly where it comes from. And some of us are feeling a guilt because we believe we know stories of people that have been shot and raped and violated and seem to be coping better than us. So immediately, I want us to all acknowledge that what you have experienced as traumatic is not the same as what another person experiences traumatic. I want us to be clear about something. When we talk about emotion, you're saying emotion. It is a flow, it is an energy. So an event can be particularly difficult and not necessarily traumatize you. And yet your father can say the simplest thing to you. Your mother can say the simplest thing to you, and it can cut you and wound you in a way that you will forever love, forever show up, and forever dance differently with life. So I want us to understand two things at the beginning of this. The first thing is you might never know where your original wound started. The second thing is most of us have many wounds. But essentially, the most important thing about this conversation is I want us to realize something. If you think what happened to you was the trauma, then that is a very disempowering event or thought. Here's the example. If I believe that something happened to me far in my past that has created my downward spiral, most times you'll never be able to find that event. Most times, if you do find that event, you're incorrect about what it is. And the fact that you like to believe that it was this far off event and that you've got to somehow go into the mystical past to regain your power is the first thing that we try and get rid of in coaching. It's a mythology. It's a false belief that needs to be smashed. The first thing you need to realize, every person in this room, is that the trauma exists right now. The event was traumatic. The trauma can only be a trauma is if it is with you right now. It is not something that needs to be hunted in some mystical, vague memory. And that's a very important distinction. And there are very clear ways of finding out how that trauma shows up for you in coaching, but in your own life, because a lot of you are self-coaching, and I'm very proud of that. You know who triggers you. You know what people say to you that sends you in a spiraling rage of anger. You know what things, and that's all I want us to anchor to here, is the knowledge of the trauma sits with me right now in this conversation, and it does not need to be unlocked by some mystical set of formulas. And this is highly important. Now let's begin this short journey that we're going to take. Let's think of you as a child. Do you know one of the absolute needs of a human being is attachment? We attach constantly, absolutely constantly. And of course, our first and most important attachments are those to those that we love as a child. There is nothing more helpless than an innocent child coming into the world. And we reach, just as animals do, ducklings, all creatures, we reach and we create a bond with this individual. And some of us, unfortunately, were in a situation where these attachments were not able to be deeply rooted and sunk. Perhaps these attachments were there, but due to very complex situations, such as the person I most recently worked with, whose parents did not have a very emotionally expansive series of understandings of what feelings were, these attachments can be compromised. Now, why I want to talk about attachment is very simple, because if you do not have an attachment system, it is very well known in psychology. I think there are even some psychologists in this room, that what happens is you do not build a healthy endomorphin system, which is where a whole lot of your really feel-good drugs develop. And that immediately, from two aspects, sets you up to have a potentially destructive set of traumatic behaviors, sure, but let's talk about the addiction side. Now, the reason for that is because you can imagine someone doesn't have a lot of feel-good hormones, the first time they discover sugar, the first time they discover heroin, the first time, sometimes even prematurely, sometimes thrust into a young lady or man's life in the most violent way, sometimes even the feeling of sexual arousal, even in a state of abuse, can cause a highly complex set of addictions where people become highly sexualized through life. And all that I want us to connect to is what the unifying thread in this conversation is that you have to attach to something that makes you feel better. And that's essentially the role that our parents play for us. And what's really interesting about this conversation of addiction is I want us to understand that if you're thinking addiction is crystal meth and cocaine and alcohol, well, then you are 100% correct. But addiction is also codependent behavior. Addiction is also drama. Addiction is also shopping. Addiction is also withholding love so that you can feel powerful in a situation where you feel powerless. Addiction could be a number of things: self-destruction, destruction of others. So it encapsulates everything from substances to behaviors. And unfortunately, essentially what has happened from a very young age is we've learned to feel unsafe in our bodies. And in being unsafe in your body, and this might happen later in life through a major trauma or an abusive relationship, one of the first things that happens, guys, and this is where the problem starts, is we disconnect from ourselves. We almost start to float outside ourselves. We become disconnected to our own feeling centers and our own mental centers. And it's quite an incredible thing. Let's simplify this very intense lecture. It almost has a feeling of psychology to it right now. I want to show you how this authenticity destroys our lives before we move into adulthood. An example would be one day, Audrey thinks that she wants a cookie, so she asks her mom for a cookie, and her mom says no. And of course, children, you know, we just are. She throws a tantrum and she gets angry, and her mother says, Audrey, good girls don't get angry and speak to their mother that way. And what happens in her gentle, sensitive little soul? She learns one of the first very destructive things that's ever going to happen to her. She learns in that moment that basically angry girls do not get loved. And what she does, because this could be different for every one of you, some of you, it's standing up for yourself. Some of you, it is a boundary where you said no. Some of you, it's some emotion. And now what happened is Audrey makes that decision that anger is a threat to attachment. I want you to think about that as statement. There are certain emotions in trauma work and in fear work that we are going to bring to the surface, that we are going to heal and get flowing again. And I want you in your own time, when you rewatch this, because I will send you the recording, because this is very dense, I want you to think about what emotions in your life you decided were a threat to your attachment. Now, how would this outplay in Audrey's life? Then later on in her life, she has taught herself that anger is bad. It threatens my attachment. The attachment is the most important thing that a child needs. And she steps out of her seat of authenticity. She does not express anger correctly. And as many of you know, because we are traveling towards the realm of this complex adulthood we find ourselves in, what ends up happening is that which we suppress pushes back like a pressure cooker. That which we do not acknowledge grows. The lost children that we ignore in the shopping center become so terrified that they grab at our legs and begin to claw at us like a demonic energy, demanding that it is acknowledged. So the very thing that you walked away from could be the thing torturing you. So once again, there's a statement: authenticity threatens attachment. And this happens in our relationships too. We learn that only certain behaviors allow us to become loved. Some of us become people pleasers, where we do all these things because we learn that that's the one way that we get love. And I'm sure that you're all quite capable of taking this for yourself of how it's done. So that is this conversation of moving into adulthood. I want you to consider something. What a trauma essentially is when you are having an experience that you are unable to process at that time. And fear and trauma are a brother and sister wolf that are always found in the same packs. And what happens in this situation is energy, as we said, emotions are meant to be temporary in a very well integrated individual. And it is so overwhelming that we somatically or physically or cellularly store this pain or this traumatic event in our bodies to be processed later on. And what's amazing, for thousands of years, we would go into ceremony, into dance, into red tents, into men's groups, into initiations, where we could have these times where we could allow the stuff to emerge. And we as a culture have robbed us of these things. So we are constantly storing the stuff, never accessing it again. And if you imagine what happens to your meridian system, if you constantly store this pain, it gets to the point where you become blocked up and you are no longer flowing. The other side, besides the fact that the fear and pain is stored inside your body, which would need to be reached in a somatic way, which I'll discuss now, the other thing that happens is, so I want us to create a distinction here. To deal with fear and trauma, we take two approaches. The first approach, we've been discussing the body. The way that it is penetrated is through the solar plexus. That's where you create all the serotonin in your body. That's where the fear center is. That's where if you look into Kundalini, that's where your power disc lies. And basically, when it comes to feeling, it is that we have to repossess the point of power in our solar plexus. And that journey is a journey of simply allowing to bring the feelings to the surface and allow yourself to fully feel it. It's a beautiful process. There's a few ways of doing it, but unfortunately in this environment, we could not do it. It's something that there's many people who can take you through those processes, or naturally, as you guys know, we do it in coaching and in courses. So I want us to just think of this paradox. Imagine sitting there and thinking, you know what, I have very high anxieties, which could be a sign of the fact that somewhere along the line, you've decided that fear is a bad energy and that powerful people don't feel fear, and therefore fear is absolutely dominating your life. Or it could be that you're afraid of intimacy. It could be so many things that you're scared to hear your voice. You can't open your mouth at work. This can come out in 1,000 different ways. So the two-pronged approach is this simple. The war for your mind and the war for your solar plexus. So the body stores that emotion, but the conversation I want to move now to is your mind. You know, the first time you have a panic attack, or the first time someone physically harms you, sexually abuses you, screams at you, betrays you, the first time as a child someone laughs at you because you're not as pretty as the other girls, or someone says something to you in the showers. It could be anything. I want us to realize that the first time you feel completely helpless, you create what is called a blueprint within the synapses of your brain. And that blueprint, never mind what's going on with the trauma. Do you see how these are hand in hand? The fear now. So we were talking about the emotion, and sure, fear is an emotion. That fear creates a blueprint in your mind where you tell yourself that you will never allow yourself to feel this helpless again. And you will do anything in your power to avoid that thing. So if it was an anxiety attack, a panic attack, perhaps you thought you were losing your mind, you will develop a fear around ever entering into that blueprint. It could have been having a car accident. It could have been a number of things. And what happens is that blueprint sits in the back of your mind, in your subconscious, and your entire life starts being built around the fact that you cannot allow yourself to feel that again. Wow. Have the conversation of, do we have free will or not? Many of the greatest minds of our time have told us we do not have free will, but we have the potential to exercise it. And this conversation is about repossessing your own home. And that home is your body. At some stage, something has made you feel unsafe in the very temple of your own soul, the physical embodiment of who you are. And we need to repossess our own minds. And in the last conversation, we went very in depth to how thought plays a role. And we spent about 15 minutes of it. And if you guys want to know more about that, I'm more than willing to send you the link. I don't want to repeat myself too much because we're bringing trauma into this conversation. I want you to consider that you will become the guardian of your own gate. I want to give you a practical example of how this would work. Imagine, let's for instance say that you have a fear of death. I'm going to use this as a case study. And you have not yet learned to become the guardian of your own mind. And one of the reasons could be due to trauma. You have been removed or possessed more by what I call an interference pattern. And what happens now is, what that means is the stories, the mind chatters constantly like a scared monkey. Now, you have the fear of death. And usually if your mind suggested to you, you might be sick and dying, what you would do is go, no, that's ridiculous, and just ignore your mind. But now the mind is essentially your shadow half. It knows everything about you. And now you've been coughing all day and you've got a slight fever, and maybe you drank too many bottles of wine a little while ago, and you've got all these reasons to believe that perhaps you were in a very bad place indeed, and suddenly you cough and your mind goes, you see, I told you. And what happens? The thought gets past this guardian. I want you to think of yourself as this powerful woman or man standing in front of the gates of your own mind, sifting what thoughts you want to enter and what not to. But now, what you would usually find as a joke, guess what you do? You suddenly go, yes, my breathing is a little bit strange, and I have been sick. And what does your mind go? It comes in harder and harder, and it starts going, yes, and this, and this, and this. And next thing, you are in an absolute state. And what was different? Because it managed to find a few things to convince you. You could turn this into an intimate relationship where someone perhaps has not told you they loved you, or they're having a bad day and you decide to make it all of yourself, and then your mind starts ripping at you. The monkey destroys the temple by going, oh, she's cheating on you, she's lying to you, she's doing, and you can destroy the situation if you do not have control of the mind. So this is a very important conversation, because I implore you to go on a journey to heal your mind, a journey to heal your solar plexus and your heart. And you know, if you think about it, if you read someone like Eckhart Tolle, you would know that he's speaking to you about your mind, or Alan Watts, or if you spoke to someone like Greg Braden, and you know that they'd be speaking about your heart, and your solar plexus is your seat of power. And each one of these houses needs to be held under control. So the really ironic thing is, what is the paradox to healing from fear and trauma? The paradox, meaning two seemingly completely different truths, is that there are two things required that a good coach will do with you, or a good process will take you through. The one is to simply go back there, to bring the absolute worst of it all into your body so that you're feeling it, and then to just sit in it and allow it to speak, not solving it, not trying to heal it, not trying to think it away, just allowing it to speak. Whereas once you couldn't be with that emotion and you stored it. So on the one hand, there is essentially a surrender, hold and feel, let it rise, let it flow, let it go. And then on the other side, because that is a surrender process, the paradox of taking your life back when it comes to trauma and to fear is that you have to go for an initiatory showdown You have to turn in the forest one day and look at the wolf who's been gnawing and hacking at your heels for your whole life. And you have to say to him, not today, wolf, not today. And that is essentially repossessing your own mind, taking back the seat of power in your own mind. You have a pituitary gland in your mind. And in your natural state, when you are in your seat of power, thought gives you inspiration. Thought is filled with love. Thought is filled with creativity. It gives you ideas constantly. But through our fracturing and through our traumaing and through our disembodiment, we are so far outside of our minds that we are experiencing ourselves from the outside thinking in. And you know what this means? By the time you get to the true you, you are listening through a fucking interference pattern. It is like thoughts bouncing inside, if you were to imagine a cave. Hello, 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 hello. That is what most people's minds sound like. And then, of course, there's 2 or 3 voices going on in there. And I assure you that through certain work, physically and somatically releasing the pain from your body and repossessing your mind, that the mind is not this perilous place that you think it is. It is a glorious tool that also connects us to all of higher reality. And that is why depression, suicides, why they are so massive in our lives, because essentially we have not got the aerial on, the aerial that allows us to close our eyes and feel the divine in all things. We sit in rooms for years, looking at the paint, feeling alone, wondering if this is all there is, because we have been removed from our own houses through trauma. So what I am calling you forth to do is to go into this hero's descent. And some of you have already started to do it, or you have done it many times and you are ready for your next one. And I'm calling you. The wolf pack is howling, and it is asking you to descend into your own pain and trauma, to feel those things. What happens in this journey is you will eventually go and meet, that is what you need to meet. And when you come out on the other side, you're for the first time going to know what your life has been all about. If your life has been about addiction, abuse, it has been about a spiritual crisis, if your life has been on the other side of the thing that is consuming you, the thing that consumes Mandy Kate, the thing that consumes Bev, the thing that consumes Llewellyn, is the very thing, if it's dominated your life, if it is a theme of your life, if it is something that has taken every part of your life, it's destroyed relationships, and it is the very thing that the wolf is howling for you to face. Because on the other side, that is the true, authentic you. The authentic you that was made unsafe as a child already. The aspects of yourself that you don't even allow yourself to feel, because everyone knows mommy doesn't like an angry girl. So we go on this wolf's journey where we surrender to meet this pack. Naturally, we're not doing the process now, but there's a number of ways we do this. We go and visit some of the worst experiences of your life. And you know what the best part is? You don't even have to remember what happened. Remember, we spoke about this blueprint. An example would be if someone's claustrophobic. They have this idea that every time they start to feel very uncomfortable, they will do absolutely anything to get away from that feeling. And what we do in shadow work is we hold a space for that person to take themselves into what is considered the most terrifying experience for them. And eventually they get to the point where they stand looking at the wolf, breathing on each other, nose to nose, and they say, is this the best you fucking got? And that is when you take your life back. And I don't care how intense or dramatic I sound, this is how I had to take my life back. I ran for so long, seizures, panic attacks. I have no idea what it is that I thought was gonna happen. So one of the things I'm gonna guide you to, or someone can guide you to, because there's a lot of people who are quite capable of doing what I'm doing, is to get to that background belief that you have. It could be that this person's going to hurt me, they're not going to love me. It doesn't have to be specific like mine. And once you can, and this is what we call by calling the wolf. For instance, I gave a very practical example last time. If you lie every night awake worrying that your husband's going to leave you, if you lie every night worrying that you could lose your job, that anxiety and trying to cope with your mind now that it has sensed that weakness, and because you are not the guardian of your gate, it will rip you to pieces for weeks. I shared with you, as a professional fighter, we used to have conversations with sports psychologists, because there is nothing worse than the week before a fight. Once that door closes, and I was in the Coca-Cola Dome in front of God knows how many people, I couldn't see the people, the lights were hot, it was action. You did what you had to do, and it was an incredible experience. And no matter how many times you got hit, I promise you, only later on, when you're cooling down over a beer, 3 hours later telling stories, do you start going, oh, I got hit there. Oh my God, I think I've hurt my ribs. You feel nothing. So why am I sharing the story with you? Most guys can't even get into that cage. And you know why? Because their minds, you know what, I used to lie at night wondering, if I got dropped on my head in just the wrong way, would I die? And what if this freak thing happens? And this is how the mind plays tricks on us. So I am essentially talking about a showdown. The first thing is to identify what somatic traumas are stuck in your own body. And we are going to allow you to fully feel them without any judgment or opinion, without trying to solve it. And what that does is it gets your plumbing running again. It gets all your meridians flowing again. And then the big war. And that is the taking back from the mind that has become possessed. And as I said, the way that is done is we call out the worst case scenario. So I've told you the story. You could be worrying about your husband leaving you. I could be worried about this fight that I'm going to have. And what essentially is happening is you are getting consumed by the fear, for the simple reason that you're not willing to look at the worst case. Do you know what we do in shadow work? We make you realize that your husband might leave you. It sounds so horrific. We make you realize that maybe he's going to leave you. And until you can get to the point where you lie there and you realize, you know what, it could happen. And if it happened, I could deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want this to happen. This is the worst thing I can imagine happening to me. But I or someone will get you to the point where you realize that you can face that thing. Do you know what happens once you've done this? Firstly, you hardly ever create it. Secondly, you go to sleep that night. Most of your neuroses disappear. Do you know, I'm going to go as far as to say that most psychological problems, I have watched people that are schizophrenic, that are bipolar, that are things that people say are completely unsolvable. I have watched it completely disappear in people just in coaching sessions. Do you know why? I want to give you a definition for a lot of those problems. Depression, manic depression, you name it. It is a fracturing of the mind, and the mind becomes fractured because it tries to compartmentalize away from the fear and trauma. So if you're in a constant state of body discomfort and sweat and anxiety and shaking, you have adrenal fatigue, any of those things, that is us needing to release the pain out of your actual body. But if you are tortured at night by your thoughts and racing heartbeat and constantly having to avoid certain situations, that fear fractures some people. And you know what the best part is? You guys think I'm talking about this long, complex process. It is taking your worst fear, realizing that you can face it. An example would be that you have panic attacks your whole life. I remember I told you guys I didn't even leave my house for 3 months. That's how scared I was. what was happening to me was I completely lost the plot. I was clinically insane. My father would drive me to a mall, and for the day, my goal was to try and walk from the one room of the one entrance of the mall to the other entrance without collapsing. That is how intense. And I can tell you now, it's got to the point where when I'm overstimulated psychically, mentally, emotionally, I can be in the middle of a party, I can be in the middle of traffic, I can be in the middle of it, and I feel the wolf coming, the sweating, the heart beating, the unreality, the feeling that I'm going to die, everything that we discussed in the first video, because I've made it tangible. And you know what? I can have a conversation. I could have even had one while I was talking to you and you wouldn't have noticed. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, is this the fucking best you've got? And I tell you, once it knows that you are dominating your own mind and your house, you become the alpha of the wolf pack. And the wolf pack was never out to hurt you. The wolf pack was the very thing that you put in your own life so that you may alchemically transcend. It was the showdown, like in all great stories, the dragon you had to slay so that Hane could find out who she is, so that Chase could find out who he really is. What an incredible thing. And that's essentially what shadow work is. And I can't talk too much because we're fast approaching the end of the talk. I want to share something with you. For example, when we're doing somatic work, what you discover with most people that are emotionally sick, it is not what you feel that is the problem. It's the way you respond to what you feel is the problem. And I'll give you another way of putting this, is like the way you feel about your emotions causes more trouble than your emotions. So if, for instance, you hate feeling scared and anxious, and you've been scared and anxious your whole life, and in the background, you've got this blueprint where you can avoid any situation that allows you go back to that super helpless moment. And this is how your life is playing, and you in very little micro adjustments, changing your relationship, changing the house that you live in, the way that you drive home, the situations, and this all is outplaying. And what you'll discover when you do certain types of shadow work coaching, the fact that you feel the way you do feel about anxiety is where the suffering comes from. It's the most incredible thing. How you feel about the emotion that you hate is why you're suffering. Because remember, we discussed that an emotion is temporary. It flows through you. An integrated wild woman or man who is fully in his spiritual presence is not a peaceful individual. They can stand on the beach with the rages of anger flowing through them for moments. And just moments later, they'll feel touched by God. We are a temporary housing that all things can flow through. A meeting point of a million feelings, a million thoughts. Do you know that in the ancient teachings, from Hermetics to plutocracy, the ancient teachers spoke of the fact that the universe is a single mind and that you are a microcosm of that, and that the mind that you hold is an exact representation of all things that expand and express in the universe. So all pains, all chaos, all beauty, the God, the lightest parts of you, the darkest parts of you. But this, of course, is not a conversation about belief. This is a conversation about taking back the power in your own life. Heinrich playfully told me the other day when we were talking about our work, he said, you know what we actually are? We glorified plumbers. We actually teach people how to get their emotions flowing again. I mean, how's this for a joke? You're suffering because your emotions are not flowing and disappearing. We're so scared to feel it that we are holding more and more of it, and it's driving us crazy. It makes our body sick. I'm not even going to get into what it does. Absolutely incredible. So we talk about the showdown, and this showdown is a space that really needs to be held for you. And this is where community becomes highly, highly important as well. It's a very, very important conversation. Community and being supported. And those first times that you go into those very vulnerable places, to have someone to guide you into them and to just know, because once you understand the processes, it's really, really powerful. It is a very powerful thing. And I want us to not underestimate the cycle breaker. I have not even been discussing epigenetics tonight, but let's understand something. You are the next in line of thousands of ancestors. And I tell you now, they're standing in this room because we're having this conversation. You don't have to believe that. Remember what I said at the beginning. But you, even scientifically, even in epigenetics, they can pick up stuff in your DNA from 7 generations ago. They've just done an epigenetical study where a whole family that has a problem with obesity, they discovered most of them died 350 years ago. Their ancestors all starved during a famine. So do not convince yourself that what is going on inside your body has not anything to do with your uncles and aunts and far removed grandfathers. You are, and this is what I believe, that 2021 and the opening of the portals. Thank you, Kate. I enjoyed your video. This is what the opening of these portals is about. If you want a definition of what this is about, of what our lives are about, if you think you have no meaning in your life, let me tell you something. The wolf pack is howling. It's calling you. And you are the one that has been called to stop the generational pain. So you're not only dealing with stuff that's been passed on to you, behaviors, addictions, you're also dealing with what is happening to you in your own life. And if we don't get a healthy way to flow and process, which is the paradox of surrender, and the other side, the discipline of standing and retaking the chamber of your mind, then essentially you're going to have a very, very slow decline. And I can promise you, I was very, very close to being an absolute tragic story. Very, very close. So I want you to consider that you are the mighty cycle breakers. We have been playing past the parcel for so many thousands of years. And that is why everyone is sick. Those that are abused, in turn abuse. Just think about it, so that you don't separate this conversation from yourself, so that you don't think that you're exempt, because I'm not. You're in a really, really bad space. It's building up, suppressing your emotions. You're not dealing with it. The wrong person says the wrong thing and you completely unload on them. That is all the world has been doing for thousands of years. Someone kills my family, I kill their family. This is all that's been going on. I was treated this way, I treat somebody else that way. So if you're looking for a meaning in your life, I can tell you, look no further. To integrate yourself is one of the most powerful things you can do. It is not just a fight for your own life, your own sanity and your own psyche. It is literally what the entire planet is calling for. We are in an accelerated cycle where all problems through the frequencies that are being bombarded on Earth, whether you think it's external or internal, I can tell you that it's both, as above, so below. Do you know what I mean by that? I mean, just look at the Schumann resonance, which is the scientific measurement of the heartbeat of Earth. It used to sit at 7.3 in 1996. Some people have clocked it at spiking 70-something in the last months. That is just the frequency that Earth is vibrating on. And you know what these accelerations and step-ups do? All that stuff stored inside your cells is coming flying up to the surface for acknowledgement, to be held like a child. It's coming up, and no one's got a choice. No one is exempt. These frequencies do not make choices. So if your life is spiraling out of control, and if you are in a really dark place, I'm telling you now that you are simply doing the work. Some of you are already on the other side, because we tend to go into the hero's journeys at different times. But nothing has got wrong. You have not got lost. Your spiritual path has not led you astray. You are simply called to transmute all those last layers of residue. It's like trying to go through an airport door to go to a more highly accelerated frequency, and they keep stopping you to ask to show what's in your pockets, or what's in your heart, or what's in your mind. It's a mighty purge that takes place before you get to go through this acceleration. What an incredible time to be alive. We need community. We need guidance. We need to be plugging into each other. It's such an incredible thing. And I want to tell you something, that if you are willing to hear the wolf's call, and if you, because you must understand that does not mean that you come and work with me. You all are being stimulated, every one of these beautiful faces in your own way. Some of you are going, oh my God, I know what course I need to do. Some of you are going, oh, I know why that keeps happening to me. We're all stimulating in a different way here. And I want to call out your courage. I have never met a wolf that when you run at it, it doesn't back down and make you the alpha. And whatever that wolf is in your life that is consuming you, it's time that you took your power back. And I need you to be forgiving on yourself and gentle on yourself. And my advice to you as we come to the closing of this very intense conversation, my advice to you would be to not even consider what the purpose of your life is, the search for a meaningful life, until you have tackled this. This is your first station. This is what has been required by the opening of the gates, 2021. And it must be done. It must be done. And once you have done this, your purpose or a meaningful life will unfold for you. And I want to be a little bit more specific about what I mean by that. To transcend or to integrate something is a very different thing. If I feel the enormity of fear and anxiety in my life, and I learn some empowerment technique from some motivational guru, which are my pet hates, and they get you to the point where you're like, yeah, nothing can stop me, and you completely remove this idea of ever feeling insecure or vulnerable in your life because you've done an empowerment seminar. You've done nothing. You've just transferred. You've transcended, which means you've just shifted away from another one of your children. Now you are not an insecure woman or man. You are a powerful individual, and you think you've broken through, and then you move into a new neighborhood. And while you're putting the post into your post box, you look left, and guess what? There's the most insecure man in the world just waiting for you to fall in love with him, because insecurity is coming back into your life whether you like it or not. You cannot run from your children. And it's a bizarre story. And the best part is those things we reject in ourselves, we usually judge in other people. Can't believe how needy that person is. Yeah, you probably don't know how to ask for help. That's how interesting it gets. So why I had this discussion is, an example is, as a non-meat eater, non-meat eaters irritate me more than anybody else on the planet, even though I wish everyone was a non-meat eater. You know why? Because we all transcended and transferred. No one integrated. Now, I'm telling you, this is an example of how this path, the shadow path, looks. I am a killer. I have been responsible for things dying. I know that at any stage I could kill something again. So therefore, for me to point a finger at someone that is responsible for the death of something would be the most ridiculous thing. I can sit next to my best friend as he has a bloody stake. Do you get what I mean by that? If we are going to transfer and transcend, then we do not have that aspect integrated inside ourselves. A person that integrates great fear holds cosmic love. A person that integrates great insecurity, integrating is different. Those emotions are still within you. You just learn to not dance with them as much. And you know why? Because you are the guardian of your own gates. You choose the part of the experience you wish to engage with. So somatically releasing is my advice, which is part of what we do on the Wolf course, and then creating an initiation and a showdown to bring that worst case blueprint subconscious thing to the surface so that you show yourself that you can face it. And I promise you, once you face the worst one, the rest drop like flies. And next Yeah, next thing you walk around absolutely fascinated by the power that you can find. And once you've done this, um, David, will you just please mute for me?
Sorry, baby.
No problem. Once you've done this, guys, once you've integrated these emotions, you've showed them they're welcome, an incredible thing happens. You can begin your purposeful life. But if you begin your purposeful life before you do this work, do you know what you're going to do? You're going to transfer the shit of your stuff all over everybody else. You're going to think you're helping people in counseling. You're going to think you're helping people in healing. But because you are not able to be present with the absolute depths of what it is to be a divine human, you will not be able to hold that space for that person. So doesn't it make logical sense that the divine intelligence that we are collectively would say, I'm going to pick this particular challenge, and when I override this challenge, if I am able to, because we know many don't, we know many fall by the sword and addiction, we know many fall by suicide and have to perhaps try again. And if you bring that gift into the world, what that gift is going to be. So from here on, the next time I speak, specifically on this strain of subjects, I'm going to speak about finding a purposeful life and how much more there is to it than people think. Because we all have this really strange idea in the spiritual community of what a purposeful life is. And I would really like to trigger and push some very uncomfortable buttons for you in that talk. But I feel this is what needs to be done right now. And I really appreciate you taking this journey for me. I mean, with me. I want to give you a distinction before I close and give people an opportunity to sign off if they don't want to do the last section. A wise man never ever chases happiness and joy. Happiness and joy are very naughty, inconspicuous fairies that play and disappear at the whim and drop of the hat. What a wise man does is he goes and finds the garden of peace. The garden of peace is where peace and is where happiness and joy dance and play every morning. If you're not sure what I mean, if you have been trying to create a meaningful life, if you are unfulfilled, if you are depressed, if you are trying to find your joy, and all of these things, it is absolutely impossible until you start with peace. Peace is where they dance. Joy is fleeting. Happiness is fleeting. Meaning changes all the time. I want you to consider the statement. When you are in a state of peace, joy springs every 5 minutes without you even expecting it. You're sitting in a coffee shop in peace, and someone smiles at you and you smile at them, and the whole room is just joy. And then you can't believe how beautiful the beach is. And then you have this idea to phone someone and do them a favor to blow their mind, because you just explode. But it comes from the garden of peace. And what this discussion tonight was about is the wolf pack that's tormenting you, that will chase you and nip at your heels to the point of insanity, and some break. I would love to sugarcoat this for you. Some break, but you are capable of doing this. It is what you planned. And once that wolf pack allows you to become the alpha, and the alpha is fear, and you have to face him, you can basically lie down with the wolves in the garden of peace. So this is a journey that I hope that this conversation has put you on about what is interrupting your peace. Why do I have a monkey mind? You need to repossess it. Why do I have a monkey heart? Because there are pains that you have not yet fully felt. And I hope that it inspires you in what it is you need to do. So as many of you know, I'm going to be running a course, and we are only going to be doing the course in groups of 4. And what happens is those groups of 4 are put into a Telegram group as soon as they've booked in. And that Telegram group Amongst those 4 people, including myself, we make a decision about which day of the week we are going to commit. I only want it in groups of 4, even if there are more than one, because what's going to happen in that group is highly personal and a lot of difficult stuff is going to come up. And then we take a journey where we will not only meet just the 4 of us online once a month, I will also be working with you each individually for your own process. And you will also be receiving 2 films or movies a week about what it is, what processes you need to be doing. And that's just my way of doing it. I implore you, if you're in a different, if that doesn't call you, to go and find someone that you could do it with. And another thing is, you might be really, really against working in a group. I highly suggest the group. And the simple reason is, as the one person gets more courageous and you realize how similar you actually are, even though you're doing it differently. Remember what we discussed. There is only one fear, and she has 1,000 smokes and mirrors. And if we can just look right at the core, you can free yourself. So thank you for your time. I'm going to give you an opportunity now to